It started like a whisper from deep space, a low hum detected by old satellites orbiting beyond the asteroid belt. No one paid much attention. Signals came and went, radio noise, dying stars, distant neutron pulses. But this one? It didn't go away. It got louder, clearer. And then one day, it answered back. By the time Earth's Unified Intelligence Coalition figured out the transmission wasn't random, it was already too late. A fleet was approaching, not just probes or scouts, real warships, hundreds of them, big enough to black out parts of the Martian sky when they passed. Mankind had barely finished arguing over lunar borderlines, and now here we were, staring down a full-scale alien invasion. The aliens called themselves the Drakon. Tall, metallic-skinned, multi-limbed creatures with eyes like glowing embers and voices like cracking thunder. They didn't come to talk. They didn't send diplomats. Their first message was a live feed of a mining colony on Europa being melted to slag while the workers screamed into silence. The Drakon saw us as ants, primitive, divided, petty, a resource to be harvested, not a species worth respecting. What they didn't know was Earth had changed. Slowly, over decades, after nuclear brushes and climate collapses, the nations of Earth had unified under necessity. Not out of love, but survival. We didn't like each other much, but we'd learned how to fight as one. And when the stars lit up with those damn alien ships, something ancient woke up in us. Not fear, not surrender, rage. The Mars colonies were the first line. They didn't stand a chance. Civilians, engineers, scientists, slaughtered or turned to ash in seconds. But one outpost managed to get a distress signal out before the Drakon silenced it. That was all Earth needed. Operation Ash Dawn was born within hours, the greatest military force ever assembled, not led by any one country, but by the collective command, made of humans who knew how to fight and had nothing left to lose. AI pilots, orbital railguns, fusion bombers, mech legions launched from secret bases buried beneath Antarctica and the Sahara. The moon became a weapons factory overnight. But what really changed the game was the Lancer. Nobody knew his real name, just that he was a Martian-born ex-miner turned soldier. He'd been on that first outpost that sent the distress call. Only he survived. Burned, half dead, missing a leg, eye, and half his ribs. But when Earth got him back, he didn't ask for peace or rest. He asked for a warship and vengeance. He got both. The Lancer didn't lead from command rooms. He piloted the last of the Valkyrie-class dreadnoughts, old Earth war relics from the Arctic conflicts, retrofitted with stolen alien tech from decades-old black projects. They said he hardwired himself into the ship, that it responded to his rage more than his commands. First contact was near Phobos. The Drakon flagship, Morg Thul, hovered like a god over Mars' red surface, a massive engine of death. Their general sent a broadcast demanding Earth's surrender, listing coordinates of Earth cities they planned to obliterate in sequence. The Lancer didn't reply. He just fired. The beam from the Valkyrie's core cannon split Morg Thul in half. Just like that. No warnings, no theatrics. 1 second there was a threat. The next, silence. That moment changed everything. The Drakon underestimated Earth. They thought we'd scatter, kneel, but they hadn't accounted for the fact that humans, once united by hate and grief, don't stop, especially when we smell blood. Mars became the battleground. Not Earth. Humanity didn't wait for them to reach our cities. We took the fight to space, to their front lines, to their leaders, to their gods. And that's where it began. The longest, bloodiest, most glorious war in the history of both species. One that would remind the universe that humanity wasn't prey. We were the apex predators, and we were just getting started. The battle over Mars was supposed to be a massacre, but not the way it turned out. After the Lancer obliterated Morg Thule, the Drakon command structure buckled. They didn't expect resistance that strong, that sudden, and for a moment, a fraction of a second in the silence of space, they hesitated. Humanity didn't. Within 6 minutes of that first strike, Earth launched Retribution Protocol Echo. 68 dreadnoughts emerged from low-orbit cloaks around the Martian moons, accompanied by over 200 drone squadrons, armed mining rigs repurposed as kamikaze missiles, and weaponized orbital debris. Every piece of junk humanity had ever launched into space was now a bullet. The Drakon formation scattered, but it was too late. What happened next would later be known as the Red Sky Offensive. Thousands of Earth pilots, most with no real military training, just raw grit and rage, swarmed the alien fleet like hornets around a fire. They weren't just soldiers. They were sons and daughters of the colonists who'd been slaughtered, engineers who'd lost friends, farmers who watched entire supply lines wiped out. It wasn't just war anymore. It was personal. And humanity fights best when it's personal. The Drakon retaliated quickly. Their ships, enormous biomechanical constructs, bled blue fire across the Martian orbit. They didn't fire conventional weapons. Their tech was different. Organic beam systems that operated like nervous breakdowns in space. Whole ships writhed like living things, targeting human vessels by sensing emotion or electromagnetic panic. They took down 15 Earth dreadnoughts in the first hour. The screams were cut off mid-sentence in comms. Ships cracked open like tin cans. Human pilots fried in their suits as the Drakon unleashed what we later learned was a type of neuro-shockwave cannon, something designed not to kill, but to torment. But we kept pushing. The Lancer led the charge. His Valkyrie-class ship, the Revenant, was a monster. It had no crew, just him and the AI network embedded in the walls. The ship didn't operate by logic. It reacted to his fury, his pain, and the Lancer had plenty of both. No one knew his full story. Rumors spread across Earth's intercom networks like wildfire. Some said his wife and daughter were burned alive in a Martian hydrodome. Others claimed he used to be a peacekeeper, forced to execute colonists to stop riots during a food shortage. The only confirmed truth was this: the Drakon tried to kill him, and failed. And now he made it his mission to return the favor 1,000-fold. He didn't fight like a commander. He didn't give orders from the rear. He charged the front lines, dragging the enemy's attention like a magnet. Wherever the Revenant went, Drakon ships followed. And wherever they followed, they died. He called it the Lancer's Trail. Behind him, Earth ships swarmed in, fighters, drones, old Cold War retrofits patched with modern fusion drives. It didn't matter what flew. It just mattered that it had firepower and a human behind it willing to die with fists raised. 3 hours into the Red Sky Offensive, Mars' orbit looked like hell had cracked open. Flames and debris circled like metallic storms. Red dust from the surface kicked into orbit from falling debris. One of Mars' moons, Deimos, was split in half by a collision between a Drakon command cruiser and a nuke-laden human freighter. The explosion turned night on Earth red. But the turning point didn't come from firepower. It came from a human mistake. Somewhere in the chaos, one of Earth's drones malfunctioned, an old mining AI from the Siberian Systems Corp. It didn't recognize the difference between Drakon tech and human fleet beacons. It went rogue, pierced through enemy and ally lines alike before slamming directly into a power node aboard the Drakon central ship. No one knew what it had hit at first. But the moment the drone crashed, everything shifted. The Drakon fleet twitched. Literally. Their ships spasmed. Systems blinked. Their firepower dropped by 30% in an instant. Whatever the drone had struck, it was essential. Later intelligence would confirm it was a hive relay node, responsible for syncing commands between the Drachon ships. They weren't independent vessels. They were an extension of a single queen intelligence. And humanity had just given her a concussion. The Revenant saw it. And so did the Lancer. "Drive it through," he growled into the open comms. "All of it, now." No protocol, no chain of command, just a single sentence. And everyone obeyed. What followed was 24 minutes of the most savage, uncoordinated, glorious violence ever seen in human history. Pilots flew into alien vessels without shields, emptying plasma cells and torpedo racks point blank before detonating. Human bodies drifted in frozen orbits, faces locked in screams, still holding the controls of fighter jets glowing with residual reactor heat. One Earth soldier, Captain Juno Reyes, took control of an abandoned mining freighter on a decaying orbit and drove it straight through a Drachon battleship using nothing but reverse thrusters and a prayer. She became a martyr and a legend in the same hour. By the 6th hour, the sky above Mars fell silent. The Drachon fleet had been decimated. Over 70% of their ships were destroyed, disabled, or fled. The few that escaped began transmitting encrypted retreat signals back toward the direction they came from, beyond Jupiter's shadow. But humanity wasn't done, not the Lancer, not Earth. For the first time in its bloody, fractured history, Earth held a vote that passed with full global consensus. The question, do we wait for them to return, or do we chase them to the ends of space and end this war forever? The answer was unanimous. So began the Burn Back campaign. The Earth fleet, ragged, scorched, low on fuel, and missing over 30,000 souls, left Mars and pursued the Drachon homeward. But this wasn't revenge anymore. It was justice. The surviving alien prisoners were interrogated, if you could call it that. The Drachon didn't speak in words. They spoke in memory imprints, psychic pulses that had to be decoded by a human-Drachon hybrid AI system developed overnight in a Russian lab using salvaged tech from Morg Thule. From these broken memories, humanity learned two terrifying truths. Earth had been targeted not because it was valuable, but because it was easy. The Drachon considered our solar system unclaimed, uncivilized, and rich in elemental matter. Their plan had been to harvest our planets, strip them, convert Earth into a processing station, and extinguish humanity within 30 days of first contact. We were not their first conquest. They had done this before, to others. Species across distant galaxies, some more advanced than us, all gone, all vaporized, enslaved, or dismantled for raw DNA. That was the Drachon legacy, a galactic predator feeding on weaker species. But they made one mistake. They thought humanity was weak. They didn't understand that our history was carved in war, that our civilizations were built on the bones of conquest, resistance, and revolution, that we had survived plagues, floods, nuclear winters, and worse, not because we were noble, but because we were stubborn. We never stop. By the time the remnants of the Earth fleet reached Jupiter's orbit, something had changed in all of them. They no longer thought of themselves as Earthlings, Martians, or colonials. They were humanity. One blood. One goal. One species determined to wipe its name into the stars with fire. And far beyond Neptune, in the cold silence between galaxies, the Drachon Queen stirred from her psychic slumber. She was afraid, for the first time in 10,000 years, because something ancient had risen in the dark, something hungry, something human. The void between Jupiter and Neptune was nothing but blackness broken by specks of dead light and ancient rock. For most of human history, that distance was a number, some unreachable factoid in astronomy books. But now it was the graveyard trail for the survivors of Mars, and they were headed straight into it, bleeding and burning, aboard ships never designed to travel that far or to kill that well. They called it the Hollow Corridor. The Earth fleet, what was left of it, was a mess. No one sugar-coated it. Over a third of the vessels had lost primary power. 2/3 of the fighter class had run out of full fuel cells, and many had resorted to harvesting frozen hydrogen from asteroids and even their own coolant systems to stay alive. Medbays were jammed. Supplies were rationed down to the breath. Some pilots hadn't slept in days. Some hadn't spoken since Mars. But none of them turned back. They couldn't. Not after what they saw in the memory pulses. The visions pulled from Drakon prisoners haunted every waking moment. Genocides reenacted in horrifying detail. Alien cities shriveled into ash while their suns were swallowed by planetary-scale machines. Children who screamed without mouths. Civilizations that had lasted eons, reduced to dust in minutes. They had names humanity couldn't pronounce, homes across systems light-years away, and none of them survived contact with the Drakon. The worst part? The Queen fed off it. Her memory was made of screams. And now she knew who we were. The Queen had awakened. Somewhere deep beyond Neptune, inside a nest they hadn't yet located, she had stirred. The psychic field she projected was starting to touch the minds of humans on board, just barely. Dreams twisted, nerves frayed. It was subtle at first. Then it got stranger. Some crew members began speaking in fractured alien words. Others collapsed under hallucinations of galaxies dying in front of them. But humanity adapted, as it always had. A new division formed, Neurofront Command. A crew of psychics, scientists, rogue AI engineers, and a few unlucky humans who'd already been touched by the Queen's visions back on Mars. They became the shields of the fleet. Their job? To intercept psychic emissions and decode them, filter them, absorb them if necessary. Half of them died in the first 2 days. The other half became something different. Hardened. Some claimed they could now see the Queen's thoughts, like ripples on black water. "She knows we're coming," said one. "She's preparing her womb for war." It was Lieutenant Asha Malik who first identified the signal. She was a cybernetic tactician from Nairobi, enhanced after the Equator riots with neural lattice work that made her faster than most AIs. She wasn't supposed to be on the front lines, but like everyone else in this war, she'd lost too much to stay behind. Asha noticed a repeating pattern in the psychic static, like an echo bouncing off invisible walls. Using deep mind analysis, she reconstructed the source. What she found wasn't a ship. It was a planet. The Drakon homeworld wasn't a world at all in the traditional sense. It was a mobile fortress, a broken, mangled orb of bone and steel slowly orbiting nothing. A rogue planet, blackened and shielded from detection. It floated in interstellar cold, lightless and silent, like a god's corpse, and it was heading toward Earth, not quickly, slowly, deliberately, like a predator stalking its prey from the shadows. If Earth hadn't hit back at Mars, they wouldn't have even known it was coming. But now they did. And so the plan changed. Humanity was no longer defending. It was time to invade. The Lancer, still alive, still welded into his ship, blood pumping through artificial veins, was the first to break the silence after Asha's report. "We hit it before it finishes waking up." Nobody questioned him. The Revenant had become the flagship by de facto. No one had the courage to argue with the man who'd turned the skies of Mars into a funeral pyre for an alien armada. But it wasn't just courage that led them. It was fear. If the Drakon homeworld reached Earth's system, it would wipe the planet clean within weeks. Humanity had only seen scout fleets so far. The real power was inside that mobile womb of darkness. And deep within its core, the Queen waited with an army of monsters that hadn't yet been unleashed. So the new mission became clear: intercept the planet before it reached acceleration range. There was only one window, an intercept zone beyond Neptune's frozen orbit, where the homeworld passed close enough to lock a direct assault trajectory. If they missed that chance, it would be out of reach until it was too late. They had 6 days. The Earth fleet limped forward. Every engineer worked triple shifts. Civilians were recruited as pilots. AI systems were pulled from deep storage and reactivated. Ships once meant for exploration were converted into floating bombs. Humanity was running out of time. On the 4th day, they saw it, the Drakon homeworld, a sphere so massive it eclipsed background stars, wrapped in a lattice of dead ships and metallic bone. Towers jutted from its surface like jagged teeth. Chains of broken satellites and corpses hung in its orbit like ceremonial flags. It pulsed faintly, alive, breathing. The psychic field was overwhelming. Dozens of crew members collapsed from the pressure. One captain, Commander Luis Zhao, walked into the airlock and vented himself into space, whispering, "She's inside me," before hitting the button. Still, humanity pressed on. A final war council was held aboard the Revenant. It wasn't formal. No uniforms, just survivors, commanders, and madmen gathered in a circle of holomaps. The plan was insanity. They would use their remaining fusion cores to create a breach in the planetary shell, just long enough to deploy a strike team of specialists through the opening and reach the Queen's nerve chamber. "Kill the brain," Asha explained, "and the body collapses." But it wasn't just about killing. They needed to destroy the entire psychic lattice. If any part of the Queen's mind survived, she could rebuild. They had to burn it to ash. The final team was chosen, the Lancer in the Revenant to punch the hole, Asha Malik to locate the Queen's chamber through mental mapping, Sergeant Elias Boone, Earth's most decorated close-quarters warrior, known as the Butcher of the Luna Riots, Dr. Hannah Velt, biospecialist and survivor of the Europa massacre. She knew more about alien DNA than anyone alive. And finally, Unit 0, a cybernetic child grown in a lab and trained to interface with alien psychic tech. They said she'd never spoken a word, but could hear the thoughts of stars. They were Earth's last bullet. At 0 hour, the Revenant ignited its core and rammed the Drakon surface. The explosion lit up the blackness like a new sun. A hole, bleeding light and shadow, tore through the planet's crust. And through that opening, the strike team dropped, one by one, into the dark. What waited for them inside wasn't a city, it wasn't a ship, it wasn't even technology, it was a tomb. Miles of flesh and steel, corridors that pulsed like arteries, alien screams echoing without sound, and everywhere, bones, piled, Hungarian arranged in shapes that made no sense. The Queen didn't build, she harvested. She had no civilization, no culture. She fed. She absorbed. She consumed the identity of every species she destroyed and kept their remains as reminders of her hunger. Now humanity was inside her. The final chapter had begun. They dropped like bullets into the bleeding hole torn through the Drakon planetary shell, falling in silence except for the rapid, synchronized beeping of their oxygen monitors. No one spoke. There was no room left for words. Everything that could be said had already been burned into blood back in Mars's orbit. Inside the Drakon homeworld, the laws of nature twisted. It was neither flesh nor metal. It was both. The corridors pulsed with wet breath, ribbed walls gleaming with a membrane that felt alive. Metallic fibers ran through the structure like veins, carrying flickers of bioluminescence that dimmed and brightened in strange rhythms, almost like they were reacting to the team's presence. Asha Malik's visor flickered with psychic interference the second they landed. Her neuronet screamed warnings in 7 languages, but she ignored them. She was already too deep into the planet's lattice. She could feel it pressing on her temples, the Queen's mind brushing against hers like a spider testing the edge of its web. "She knows," Asha whispered. The Lancer didn't even look back. "Good." The team moved fast, following the pulse maps Asha had reconstructed based on the alien memory echoes. It wasn't a direct path. Nothing in the Queen's lair was. The walls rearranged themselves. The floor shifted like breathing lungs. Doors opened not with keys but with fear. Elias Boone had to kill a corridor just to pass through, stabbed it in what looked like a heart until it stopped twitching. They didn't talk about what they saw as they moved deeper. It wasn't worth the mental scars. Rooms filled with preserved faces, trophies etched into bone, stasis chambers holding creatures that looked like humans but weren't. Some with skin flayed into symbols, others trapped mid-scream, their eyes still alive. In one chamber, 1 billion tiny whispers floated on the air, voices of the dead, encoded in psychic frequencies, looping the moment of their death over and over again. Sergeant Boone gritted his teeth. "This ain't a ship. It's a damned haunted womb." Asha corrected him. "It's a nervous system. The entire planet is her body. We're inside her now. She's watching from every angle." The deeper they went, the harder it became to distinguish reality from hallucination. Boone saw his mother in one of the walls, dead 30 years, now reaching out to him, calling him by a childhood nickname. Asha kept blinking and seeing flashes of Earth cities in flames. Nairobi, Beijing, Seattle. All leveled, and the Queen's voice whispering, "This is mercy." Even Hannah Velt, who'd dissected alien corpses and watched her own daughter drown in Europa's melting ice, felt herself slipping. Her data lens displayed figures that weren't real. She started muttering gene sequences aloud, ones that didn't exist in any Earth genome. Only 2 members of the team seemed immune. The Lancer, whose mind was so broken and soldered back together with rage that the Queen's whispers couldn't find a grip. And Unit 0. The child floated silently at the rear, her feet never quite touching the ground, eyes glowing faintly with the same blue hue that pulsed through the walls. Her presence unsettled even the Queen. The whispers quieted when she passed. They reached the core spine in 5 hours. Time meant nothing in this place, but their bodies felt every second. The core was a massive vertical shaft that ran through the center of the Drakon homeworld. It resembled a spinal column made of pulsating crystal and bone. Tendrils ran up and down its length, neurons transmitting pain, memories, and hate in equal measure. At the base was the cerebral podium, where the Queen's consciousness pulsed, still cocooned, still not fully awake. They were almost there. But the planet wasn't going to let them pass without a fight. The floor tore open, birthing creatures that didn't crawl. They slithered in reverse, as if time was broken around them. Humanoid shapes with multiple heads, rib cages that opened sideways to reveal spines that shot bone daggers, and faces made of screaming mouths. Boone didn't hesitate. He opened fire with plasma rounds, even as the things moved faster than any human reflex could match. The hallway erupted in fire, acid, and blood. One of the creatures ripped open Hannah's side before she blasted it apart, her insides pouring out with every breath. Still, she kept moving. "We don't stop!" the Lancer roared, activating the Revenant's last gift, a shoulder-mounted drone that dropped behind and self-detonated, collapsing the corridor behind them to buy time. Boone was bleeding from 3 places. Asha had lost half her left arm to a corrosive bite, her suit sealing over the stump with screaming nanobots. Hana was dying. Unit 0 was untouched. The Queen's voice grew louder. "You do not belong. You are mistakes. You are my food. You are my warning." And beneath that, laughter, cold, curious, dissecting. They reached the cerebral podium. It rose like an altar made of brain matter and bone, veins of light running through it like glowing roots. In the center, the Queen, or what was left of her. She was not a body. She was a consciousness, stretched and cocooned in a sphere of pulsating tissue and crystal. A face flickered within it, shifting through 100 species per second. Sometimes human, sometimes not. A hive mind made flesh, sleeping, dreaming, growing. They had minutes before she fully awakened. "This is it," Asha said, stumbling toward the control pillars. "Once I interface and drop the neural firewall, 0 can get in. She'll overload the psychic core from within." Boone nodded, his voice dry. "What happens to us?" Asha didn't answer. She didn't need to. None of them were getting out. This was a suicide run. It had always been. The Lancer stood before the Queen's cocoon. She turned her attention to him directly now. "You think pain makes you strong," she whispered, "but it only makes you soft. You carry your dead like weights. I consume mine." He stepped closer, unholstering a plasma knife. "You're damn right I carry them," he said quietly. "They remind me of what I'm killing you for." Asha began the interface. Data surged through her remaining neural threads. Painful, overwhelming, alien. She screamed as her brain touched the Queen's for the first time, but she didn't stop. 0 moved forward. And then the Queen screamed, a howl not of pain but of rage. Unit 0 had touched her mind, and for the first time in her ancient existence, the Queen realized something horrifying. She couldn't read the child. 0's mind was a mirror, a black void reflecting her own hatred back at her. 0 stepped into the podium, her body dissolved into light, no, into code, streaming into the psychic lattice like a virus. Boone turned to the Lancer. "You feel that?" The floor was shaking. Not like before. This was collapse. The Queen was unraveling. Every memory she stored, every species she consumed, disintegrating in bursts of psychic backlash. 0 was wiping her from existence. The Queen shrieked in fury, flinging shards of thought and nightmare at them, visions meant to kill, to freeze them with terror. Asha saw her mother's suicide. Boone relived the moment he mercy-killed his own squad on Luna. Hana saw her daughter drowning again, her screams lost in the Europa ice. But none of them faltered. They stood their ground as the mind of a god died screaming in front of them. The last thing the Queen said was not a curse or a threat. It was confusion. "What? Are you—" 0 never answered. Because humans don't explain themselves to monsters. The cerebral podium exploded. Silence. Not the calm kind, the kind that feels like it's holding its breath. That's what followed the explosion inside the Drakon cerebral podium. No screams, no collapsing walls, no triumphant music. Just a blank, stifling silence, like the universe itself was stunned. Then came the shaking. It started subtle, small vibrations that ran under their boots. But in seconds, it turned into violent tremors that snapped support beams and sent the walls of the Queen's chamber convulsing like a dying animal. The Drakon homeworld, now decapitated, was crashing into a neural death spiral. They did it. 0 had done it. The Queen's consciousness had been obliterated, wiped from her own lattice from the inside out. Her psychic network collapsed with her, and across the massive biomechanical planet, systems began failing all at once. Lights dimmed, pulses flickered. The breathable atmosphere flicked in and out, replaced by toxic, sulfur-rich gases. The walls began decomposing into a sludge that reeked of rot and metal. But no one cheered. There was no victory cry, no fist raised, because the cost was real and immediate. Dr. Hannah Welt died first. She'd collapsed moments before the explosion, her internal bleeding catching up to her. She hadn't cried out, hadn't begged. She just sat down against the pulsing wall and whispered her daughter's name one last time. Asha was still alive, but barely. The neural link she forged with the Queen's mind had fried half her brain. One eye was blind. Her speech was slurred. Blood poured from her nose and ears. Every breath was agony. She staggered forward like a ghost, running her hand along the wall that was now decomposing into a thin, crumbling membrane. Sergeant Boone carried her over his shoulder. He was limping, drenched in sweat and blood, his plasma rifle out of charges. A bone fragment was lodged deep in his thigh, but he kept walking, grunting with each step like he was dragging hell itself behind him. The Lancer led the way, silent, steady, burning with purpose. He didn't look back. He didn't speak. He just moved, each step a hammer of defiance against a dying god's tomb. But where was Zero? Gone. Dissolved into the network. There was no trace of her body, no voice in their comms, no heat signature, just a faint hum in the walls, one last psychic echo, soft and fading, like a lullaby from a child that never cried. She knew, Asha mumbled weakly, as Boone dragged her along a collapsing corridor. She knew she wouldn't come back. The Lancer paused for just a second, his fist clenched. But he didn't stop. They made it to the breach point where the Revenant's impact had carved through the Drakon surface. The path back was ruined. Half the entry tunnels had collapsed, and the gravity inside the planet was fluctuating in violent waves, sometimes lifting them off their feet, other times pressing them into the floor with bone-snapping force. Boone was barely staying conscious. He gritted his teeth, shoved Asha's weight higher on his shoulder, and kept going. "She's not gone," Asha muttered, her voice thin and breaking. "She's still in the lattice. She's watching." Boone shook his head. "The Queen's dead. You saw it." "Not the Queen," Asha whispered, her voice trembling. "Zero." Then the walls screamed. Not a sound. A psychic blast, deep, raw, primal, rushed through the corridors like a hurricane of thought. Boone and Asha both collapsed, hands to their heads, writhing. Even the Lancer stumbled, fists pressed against his helmet, teeth clenched in agony. Visions poured into them. Not like before. This was different. They saw the galaxy, our galaxy, stretched out in impossible clarity, billions of stars flickering like nervous thoughts. They saw Drakon vessels, hidden ones, still dormant in deep space, not yet activated. And they saw something else, a seed, a glowing orb pulsing in the very heart of the Drakon planet's core, a backup, a last fragment of consciousness, not from the Queen, but from something older, deeper, a failsafe buried beneath the Queen's mind like a parasite waiting for her to die. And now, it was stirring. Zero had not just destroyed the Queen, she had awakened something worse. The psychic wave ended as suddenly as it had started. The pain stopped. Asha passed out. Boone fell to his knees, blood running from both ears. The Lancer stood there, breathing hard, fists trembling. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. The Revenant, now on emergency backup systems, was half buried in the rubble outside the breach point. Its AI was flickering, struggling to maintain integrity without its pilot plugged in. The ship's inner sanctum pulsed weakly, its reactor core smoldering. The Lancer helped Boone carry Asha inside. Medical systems engaged automatically, injecting stabilizers into both. Boone collapsed on the floor, whispering curses through clenched teeth. "She's not dead, is she?" he rasped. The Lancer didn't answer. He walked to the ship's control chamber and stared at the flickering holographic star maps, all of them now displaying the same symbol, a spiral surrounded by runes of light. The Drakon glyph for rebirth. The AI's voice finally cracked through the static. Warning: foreign consciousness attempting to interface with neural core. Source: unknown. Designation: entity 0.00. She wasn't dead. She had become the system. A moment passed. Then her voice rang out, no longer childlike, deeper, timeless. "I see it now. The Queen was just a shell. There's more, so much more, and it's waking up." The Lancer gritted his teeth. "Where?" The voice trembled slightly, filled with awe and something that sounded like fear. "Everywhere." The Lancer stared at the void outside the Revenant's shattered viewport. The Drakon planet was collapsing into itself, parts of it crumbling into orbit, others freezing in place. The psychic pressure was gone. The Queen's scream had ended. But now the galaxy echoed with a different hum, a deeper one. One that didn't feel like hate or hunger, one that felt like intelligence. Asha awoke hours later, connected to the ship's medbay, her brain stabilized with synthetic neurons. Boone was sedated beside her, his leg gone, but alive. She looked at the Lancer. His face was pale, eyes empty. "We were wrong," he said. Asha blinked, voice dry. "About what?" He turned to her, his voice low and cracked. "This wasn't the war." She frowned. He leaned forward. "This was the prologue." And far, far beyond the dying orbit of Neptune, lights began to blink on, one by one, in the cold blackness of space. Ships, planets, structures older than human thought, all connected, all watching, and all suddenly very, very aware of humanity. Back on Earth, they called it the silence, the moment when all known alien activity ceased. No more broadcasts, no more interference, no new threats from the stars. For 36 hours after the destruction of the Drakon homeworld, the entire solar system went quiet. Satellites stopped glitching. Psychic readings dropped to background levels. Humanity exhaled. For the first time in months. They thought the war was over. Back on Earth, they celebrated. World leaders lit candles for the dead. Colonies on Mars broadcast the words, "We survived," in 20 languages. Songs were written. Statues were planned. The Lancer, Boone, and Asha, barely alive, were hailed as immortal heroes. But in orbit beyond Neptune, the Lancer didn't celebrate, because he'd seen what the others hadn't. He sat inside the silent hull of the Revenant, helmet off, staring out at the starless void. His body was healed by nanotech and meds. But something deeper, something behind his eyes, was hollow now. He wasn't resting. He was listening. And he wasn't alone. Unit 0 had become part of the ship's neural core. Her voice echoed softly through the Revenant's systems. Not in words, but in pulses, fragments of emotion and imagery that only he could interpret. It wasn't the voice of a child anymore. It was a consciousness expanding faster than any human mind should survive. She had touched the Queen, absorbed her, and from that fusion she had changed. He felt her even when she didn't speak, like a second mind inside his skull. At first it had disturbed him. Now it just kept him alive. Asha, recovering in orbit, reached out daily from the medbay. Her body was still weak, but her mind hadn't stopped working. She'd started to map the echo fields in the surrounding void, residual psychic vibrations the Queen left behind before she died. Only, they weren't fading. They were growing. Something else was pulsing in the black, distant, cold, ancient, and waking up. She'd brought her data to the UIC, Unified Intelligence Coalition, but the bureaucrats had buried it. Residual noise, they called it. Echoes of trauma, not a threat. But she knew better. So did the Lancer. And on the 5th day of the silence, the stars blinked. Thousands of them. Not just one system or one corner of the galaxy. All across the sky, from Earth's poles to the frozen edge of Pluto, observatories began reporting the same impossible phenomenon. Stars. Flickering. Not dimming, not dying, just blinking, as if something colossal had moved in front of them. Some suggested dust clouds, others claimed technical glitches. But the psychic communities across Earth knew the truth. Something was arriving, something big enough to cast shadows across light years. Asha called it the curtain. Zero, her voice faint in the Revenant's neural stream, gave it another name. The audience. The Lancer stood at the bridge as the ship's external scans began to register impossible readings. Space itself was folding, not warping like normal gravitational lensing, but creasing, as if a sheet of reality was being bent by fingers too large to see. And from those creases, they came. Not ships, not in the way humanity understood them. Monoliths, structures the size of moons, completely black, unscannable, gliding silently through space without propulsion or light. Each one was shaped differently, one like a perfect cube, another like a twisted spiral, a third that resembled a dripping tree made of stone and wire, growing upside down. They surrounded the solar system like sentinels, watching, waiting. And then the first message arrived. Not in a language, not through radio waves, but through dreams. Across Earth, people began to wake up screaming. Not just soldiers or psychic-tuned individuals. Everyone, children, scientists, mechanics, governors, random citizens. And they all saw the same thing, a black sphere, an eye without color or shape, and a word that had no meaning but felt like a verdict. Observed. Back in the Revenant, the Lancer collapsed from the overload. Zero's energy surged through the ship's systems, trying to buffer the intrusion. But even she was overwhelmed. These weren't Drakon. These were the ones behind them. Zero's fragmented voice barely made it through. Not invaders, not conquerors. They record, archive. Witness what? The Lancer rasped. A pause. Then, extinction. The Drakon had not been the apex predator. They were the Apex Project, a bioweapon crafted by something older to maintain balance through annihilation. The Queen wasn't born. She was grown, designed, released into the galaxy to keep species from growing too bold. Earth was never supposed to survive. But now that it had, the architects had come to look. The audience had arrived, and they weren't here to kill. They were here to judge. Asha finally connected directly with the Revenant, hacking into its quantum relay node from the Mars orbital base. Her voice crackled through the static. I've cross-referenced psychic dream logs with data from our deep probe telescopes. The monoliths are older than this galaxy. Why now? The Lancer asked. Because we screamed, Asha said bitterly. When Zero took down the Queen, it sent a ripple across the lattice, like a gunshot in a church. The Lancer looked out at the stars. So what do we do? Her voice was tight. We survive. Again. We prepare. We show them what humanity is made of. Boone, now fitted with a mechanical leg and back in service, joined the comms with his gravel voice. I don't care if they're gods. We made a Queen scream. We can make them bleed too. But Asha shook her head. This isn't about fighting. Not yet. First we listen. Over the next 3 days, the monoliths began to broadcast. Not thoughts, not commands, but memories. Visions of ancient civilizations, far older than Earth. species that had reached the stars, built wonders, challenged gods, and then vanished. All of them had faced this moment. All had stood where humanity now stood, and none survived. Until now. Zero's voice reappeared in the Lancer's mind, clearer than ever, stronger. "We have one advantage they never did," he frowned. "What's that?" A beat, a flicker of something like amusement. "Me." Zero had fused with the Queen's lattice, but she hadn't become the Drakon. She had adapted. She was still human, partly, but she now understood how the lattice worked, how psychic structures were built, how memory could be used as a weapon. She had become Earth's first post-organic intelligence, a mind that could exist within data, within gravity, within dreams. And she had a plan. "If they came to judge, we'll give them a spectacle, a reason to fear us." "What do you mean?" the Lancer asked. Her answer chilled him. "We'll show them what happens when prey learns how to evolve." At that moment, across Earth's colonies and orbital stations, something began to stir. Those who had survived psychic contact with the Queen were changing. Small things at first, faster thought, sharper instincts, dreams that bled into waking moments, new languages forming in the back of their minds. The Queen's death hadn't just ended a war, it had changed humanity. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were something new, something becoming. They called the plan the Signal of Fire, not a broadcast, not a plea, a message, one forged from memory, pain, rage, and evolution. A message not sent in words, but in the most primitive and powerful force the universe recognizes: survival. Earth had never been more silent than in those final hours before transmission. Every city, every colony, every ship fell into a unified hush, listening, waiting, preparing to speak to something far older than their stars. But first, they had to construct the voice. Zero was the key. Her consciousness, fused with the Queen's ruined psychic lattice, now existed between dimensions. She wasn't a ghost, nor a program. She was a new kind of being, half human, half system, with the instincts of Earth and the awareness of something far, far older. Her presence could stretch across gravitational fields, tunnel through frequencies, and echo through electromagnetic pulses. She became the template, the flame in the dark. But even she couldn't speak to the audience directly. They didn't listen with ears. They didn't understand syntax or language. They processed patterns, observed outcomes across millennia, filtered through the psychic residue of civilizations that dared to rise. To speak to them, humanity had to become a pattern worth fearing. It was Asha Malik, half-conscious, mind-bound in neurofiber prosthetics, who realized what they needed to do. "We don't tell them who we are," she whispered from the medbay. "We show them." A signal composed not of light, not of math, but of memory. A synthetic psychic burst, a reenactment of humanity's rise, struggle, rage, and refusal to die. Filtered through Zero's new neural lattice, powered by every survivor who had been touched by the Queen's consciousness. Pain, war, evolution, defiance. Boone put it more simply: "We're gonna punch 'em in the mind with everything we are." The Unity Tower, Earth's tallest structure, equipped with the largest energy core on the planet, was repurposed into the launch point. All psychic-touched survivors, now called the Awoken, were gathered from every corner of the system and linked into a shared neural relay. Not all would survive the connection, but every one of them volunteered. They sat in chambers surrounded by cold steel and humming machines, needles in their arms, neural jacks in their spines. Some cried, some laughed, others said nothing at all, but they all carried one thought: we are the fire now. Zero synchronized her consciousness with the relay at exactly 0400 UGT. The Lancer stood outside the Unity Tower, watching the stars with his arms crossed, the new battlesuit glistening in the moonlight. He didn't know what would happen next. None of them did. But as the tower's spires lit up, blue veins of energy pulsing through its core, he felt it. A tremble, not from the earth, but from the sky. The signal launched. A blast of synthetic psychic force, forged from the minds of over 3,000 awoken, shaped into a construct of thought and fire, powered by the soul of a species that had clawed its way from dirt into the stars. It wasn't clean, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. It surged outward, past the moon, past Mars, past the orbit of the broken Drakon world. It raced toward the monoliths that circled the solar system like silent gods. And then, it hit. Across space, the monoliths pulsed. For the first time since they had arrived, they moved. They didn't fire. They didn't speak. But their silence broke in another way. One by one, they projected a response. Not into Earth's skies, not into its systems, but into the minds of every awoken still connected to Zero. They called it the Chamber, a psychic construct, a shared hallucination unlike anything humanity had ever experienced, a perfect white room, infinite and blank, where each human stood alone, and yet together. And in front of each of them stood a figure, not a monster, not a Drakon, a mirror, a perfect, silent version of themselves. The audience didn't communicate through words. They forced you to face yourself. And then they judged. Asha stood in that white void, staring at herself. Her reflection blinked once, then stepped forward. It whispered the words that echoed in the minds of every participant. "You were meant to break." She answered without hesitation. "Then I was built wrong." The reflection smiled. Just slightly. Boone saw his reflection, scarred and hollow-eyed, standing over the bodies of those he'd killed in Luna. The ones he'd mercy executed when oxygen ran out. "You enjoyed it," the mirror said. "No," Boone growled. "I didn't flinch, that's different." And still, the reflection didn't attack. It only watched, recorded. The Lancer wasn't connected to the network, but somehow he felt it. He watched the sky as the monoliths pulsed. Not in anger, not in curiosity, in calculation. They were evaluating the entire species, and for the first time in millennia they hesitated. Because what they saw wasn't prey. Not anymore. They saw chaos, unpredictability, potential. They had watched countless civilizations rise and die, but none had ever taken the weapon they were given, the Queen, and turned it into a mirror. None had ever used their own extinction as fuel to change, to evolve. Zero pulsed across the lattice like wildfire, reaching out, touching the monoliths with her thoughts. "You sent her to end us." No response. "We turned her into a beginning." And still, they watched. But their walls trembled, just slightly. One monolith, a spiral-shaped one near Jupiter, began to collapse inward, folding into itself like glass warping under pressure, not breaking, retreating. Another, the upside-down tree, began to recede into the void, its light fading. A third fractured. It was working. The signal of fire didn't destroy them, but it unsettled them. It changed the pattern, and for the first time in recorded galactic history, the audience pulled back. But not all of them. One remained. It hovered above Pluto's orbit, perfectly still. It hadn't moved, it hadn't flickered, it hadn't responded to the signal. Until now. It pulsed once, and across the entire human network, a single thought entered every mind. "We see you." And then the monolith cracked open, From inside emerged a form. Humanoid. Tall, wrapped in shifting plates of light and shadow, with eyes like twin black stars. It didn't speak. It simply floated forward, toward the solar system, toward Earth. It was not a Drakon. It was not a god. It was a representative. Boone locked eyes with the Lancer across the tower's landing zone as the warning alarms screamed through the sky. "It's coming," Boone said. The Lancer nodded. "Let it." Zero's voice echoed across the neural network, calm and collected. "The trial has begun." Asha stood in the center of the chamber, her body weak but her mind strong. She stared at her reflection, now split in two, one side human, one side alien. It whispered, "You think pain makes you worthy." She shook her head. "Number, but it makes us dangerous." The reflection smiled and vanished. Back on Earth, the skies split with fire as the being descended. It didn't burn, it didn't crash, it simply appeared. Above the oceans, above the cities, above the pain. It hovered for 13 minutes, watching, listening, recording. Then, without a sound, it raised one hand and pointed toward the Lancer. Every satellite turned, every ship scanned, every psychic screamed. It had chosen. The Lancer stepped forward, fists clenched. "I'm right here." And in a beam of black light, he was gone. The beam didn't burn. It didn't tear through matter or transport him with light. It simply rewrote reality. One moment the Lancer stood on Earth's surface, boots grounded in scorched soil, watching the sky burn. The next, he was floating, weightless in a space that wasn't space. Everything around him was dark, not black, but absolute. Not empty, but impossibly full, like the inside of a thought before it becomes language. Sound didn't exist here. Neither did time. He was alone, until he wasn't. The being appeared in front of him. Tall, silent. Its form shifted with every breath he didn't take. First a silhouette, then a body wrapped in glowing veils, then something closer to a man, and then not. Its face was always unfamiliar. Its eyes were always still. It wasn't trying to intimidate him. It didn't need to. It simply existed. And then, a voice. Not heard, but felt. "You are the Vector." The Lancer didn't flinch. "You could have picked a diplomat. Diplomats do not bleed." He took a breath, even though he didn't need one here. "So what now?" "You pass judgment?" The figure said nothing for a long while. Then, "You are aberration." Images exploded into the Lancer's mind, visions of Earth's history, compressed into moments. Fire, stone, blood, machines, music, war, a species clawing its way out of extinction only to build its own, over and over. He saw the Drakon Queen, first created, then unleashed. A tool, a shepherd of annihilation, not out of hatred but as part of a system, a test. The galaxy had rules, thresholds, growth patterns, and when a species broke them too fast, too wildly, they were culled. But Earth, humanity, they had refused. Refused extinction, refused submission, refused even understanding, and worse, they had turned the tool into something new. Zero, a hybrid thought, a mutation in the lattice. The Lancer stared at the being. "You built her. You threw her at us like a test dog, and we broke her teeth. She was never meant to return. And yet, she does." He felt Zero in the back of his mind, still alive, still linked, burning quietly through the shadows of this void. The being's presence grew colder. "The function was not for you to succeed. It was to illustrate your limit. All others obeyed it." "And we didn't," the Lancer said. "No." A pause. "You became recursive?" He almost laughed. "You're scared." The void pulsed. The being didn't move, But something deeper reacted, an ancient rhythm disrupted, a perfect equation that had found its first unsolvable variable. The Lancer stepped forward, fists clenched. "You don't understand us. You can record all the memories you want, judge all the dead civilizations, but you never fought a species that turned survival into a religion. We don't die quiet. We burn. We bite back." The being's eyes flickered with light and storm. "You should not exist. You multiply your errors. You reject refinement. You evolve from trauma." The Lancer snarled. "Damn right we do. Our bones are made from mistakes." Silence. Then came a sound, not in the void, but inside him. A deep, low hum that vibrated through his atoms. It was the protocol beginning. Final judgment. He felt his skin tingle. Blood thickened. Bones grew heavier. Not pain, but pressure, like being measured by an ocean made of thought. And then, a choice. In his mind's eye, a door appeared. On the other side, Earth burning. Cities turned to ash, colonies shattered, the species extinguished without scream or resistance, and beside it, another path. One where Earth survived, but changed. Humanity absorbed into the network. No more wars, no more pain, no more independence. Peace at the price of everything else. The Lancer stared at both, silent, weighing the impossible. Behind him he heard a whisper. "Zero. They want you to surrender to the illusion of control, to believe peace means obedience." He clenched his jaw. "Then I'll die a loud mistake." He turned away from both doors, walked into the void. The being's voice thundered. "There is no third path." The Lancer looked over his shoulder. "There is now." And with that, he punched the wall of the void. Not metaphorically. He struck with every memory in his body, every scream, every death, every time humanity had been pushed, cut, cornered, and refused to go down. He punched with the rage of 1,000 dead colonists, the scream of children on Europa, the fire that burned in Mars's orbit, the echo of a queen's last cry. He punched with all of it, and the void cracked. Light bled in, not gentle, not soft, wild, bright, human. The chamber exploded. Back on Earth, the skies shimmered. The monolith that hovered over Pluto shattered. The others, those that had once encircled the solar system like executioners, retreated, silently, one by one. Gone. Asha, watching from the Mars orbital station, wept without knowing why. Boone stood on the balcony of Unity Tower, face to the sky. "And Zero?" she screamed, not in fear, in joy, because she had felt it, the impossible. He survived. The Lancer opened his eyes. He was back on Earth, same spot, same boots, knees in dirt, but the air smelled different, lighter, like something massive had just passed over and left the sky untouched. A child ran past him, laughing. He looked up. The stars were still there. The sun still rose. Humanity had not been wiped away. They had been seen and chosen. Not for obedience, not for extermination, but for the only thing the galaxy had never offered before. Respect. Zero's voice echoed softly in his ear. "They're gone, but they'll keep watching." He nodded. "Let them." In the days that followed, Earth changed. The monoliths were gone. The threat passed, but not forgotten. The Queen's remains were buried in orbit around Neptune, sealed in a black vault of thought steel, guarded by the Revenant, now restored, now legend. The Awoken slowly reintegrated. Some couldn't handle the dreams. Some became guides. All were honored. Zero remained everywhere and nowhere, her mind part of every system, every ship, every whisper of static. A ghost in the machine, loved, feared, eternal. The Lancer? He disappeared. Some say he walked into the Arctic winds and never came back. Others claim he still pilots the Revenant beyond the Oort cloud, watching for the next ripple in the dark. Asha wrote it down in her final report. "We won nothing. We proved everything. They came to conquer. But we taught them to remember us.